got kind of a funny story about Tony, very recent. Tony is very, very up on anything that happens in the Detroit Lakes area. He lives right in Detroit Lakes, I believe, correct? He's a very, very avid ice angler. He does some filming with Jason Mitchell. He's on the Clam Pro team. Very, very active angler. Does a lot of radio stuff. He's a great outdoor personality. Tony knows everything that happens in Detroit Lakes area with fishing. Anything. If any of you guys were fishing one of his lakes, he knows when you were there. Trust me, he knows this stuff. Me and Kyle were out at Long Bridge a week ago Friday, and we're standing there in the dark, in our striker suits, jigging off the bridge, and there's nobody around. We're just jigging away. And all of a sudden we see this silhouette walking down the road. Comes down onto the side of the bridge, and I hear, "Hey, what are you guys doing?" It was Tony. He wanted to see what was going on. There was actually a fish house out there, and he wanted to see who the dummies were that were out fishing out on the lake, but out in the thin ice. But anything that goes on in the Detroit Lakes area, Tony knows about. I'm going to bring him up now. Mr. Tony Mariotti. He's going to fill your brain with more information than you can handle.
I'll sure try. Thank you, Scotty. All right, well, that is kind of true, and I do like to keep an eye on what's going on in the Detroit Lakes area. When I look around this room, though, I see people with a lot more experience than me. I see some familiar faces. I see some people that I know who you are just by the name, whether it was in tournaments. I also see competition. You know, I do like to keep an eye on the lakes around DL, and I like to venture out where nobody else is, but I have a story over one of the guys that I saw in the crowd tonight. There was a little lake, and I knew nobody's ever fished this lake. Nobody ever stepped foot on this lake. I've watched it for a couple of years, and I stepped on it here last winter, beginning of the winter, and I went out to the middle, and there were holes all over right where I would drill, and it kind of bothered me. And as I fished the lake and moved on to another lake, I end up running into this kid a few weeks later, and I'm talking to him, and turns out Ryan Colbert is now trying to find all my spots, so I got to keep an eye on him too. He's thinking the same way I am. But tonight we're going to just talk a little bit about overthinking fish. I want to keep this real general. If you have questions while I'm talking, just shout them out, ask a question. I try to keep this really local. We're going to look at lakes right around Detroit Lakes. I'm not going to give you general things. I'm not going to just say, this works on this lake, this could work here. I'm going to show you actual lakes in our area that I fish and what works for me. I know that with the knowledge in this room, I look at it as I'm not here to reinvent the wheel. I'm not here to show you something earth-shattering, and I'm also not here to just say this is how you have to do it. I put on my clam socks this morning, and I put on my clam suit, and that's what you have to do in order to catch fish, because it's just not true. And we all walks of life, anybody who does this, I am anxious to hear, if you have ideas or things that are different than what I'm talking about, let me know, because sometimes I do think we tend to overthink fish. So, to start it off, fish typically have smaller brain relative to body size than any other mammal. If a mammal of the same size has a brain 15 times larger than a fish, yet we spend tens of thousands of dollars on gear and ideas and watching videos and YouTube videos and calling buddies and getting information, all to try to figure out, these fish that really, they're fish. They've been doing the same thing for the last 50 years in a lot of cases. It's just that we are finally changing our ways, and sometimes it's good, sometimes it isn't, and we'll talk about that. So, when somebody says we're going fishing, things pop in your head, and a lot of times when I talk to people, they're overwhelmed. I'll be in a store, somebody comes in and they want to know, geez, where do I fish? What should I do? I don't know. I get guys that come up to me and they start talking, am I going to find fish in the weeds right now? Are they going to be in the basins? Are they going to be out on structure? I don't have a boat. I don't know. I don't know how the graphs work. I don't know where this structure is. What are you talking about? I don't know, I don't know what a break is. What do you mean? Lure selection, we're all junkies for that, and I don't care who you are. Lure selection, people want to be told what to buy. They want to be shown exactly what to do. You have to use a 1/8 ounce jig with a 4-inch twister tail, and you need to troll it behind you at 2.2 miles an hour. And that's what they want to hear, or that's what they think they need to hear. Same with, people come up and they want to talk moon phases. They want to talk, what are the water temps? Where are the fish at water temps? Where's the thermocline located? What time of day do I have to be out there? And then the other good question is, well, then what happens when I find the fish? What if I find fish? What do I do? And it's this constant, what's next? What should I do? What should I do? And in all honesty, you can go crazy. You bang your head against the wall. You're gonna have all these thoughts going through your head, and it's not that complicated. We just need to not overthink the fish. If you just get out and fish, you'll figure a lot of these things out. If you are using a jig and a white Mr. Twister tail, it works. If you're using a crankbait at 2.1 miles per hour, pulled 50 feet behind you in 18 feet of water, it works. I mean, you can get as technical as you want, but you don't need to, or you will go crazy. Okay, so fishing's supposed to be fun. The biggest thing that I talk to people about, can talk or tell people, is you just have to get out and do it. I had a long conversation, and I had a lot of conversations on KFGO radio or WDAY radio in the area, and talking about that, where to go, what to do, and you just need to get out and do it. You need to get out and fish. I was on KFGO radio, and I said for 2 days in a row that I was on that I am the only person standing on Longbridge at 8 o'clock at night, fishing till 10 o'clock, 9:30, and I am getting a 28-inch walleye most nights. Not catching a lot of fish, but I'm catching some big fish. I was telling people where to go. I was telling them what I was using, whether it was a jigging wrap off the bridge or a white Mr. Twister tail on a 1/4 ounce jig and just vertical jigging over the bridge like Scotty and Kyle were doing last week. I was telling people this on a radio station that I know people in the area are listening to. And I sat there for 5 nights in a row, and I was the only person there, except for a 12-year-old kid who picked up more fish than I did, because he was there. So when I talk to people, or when I come in and visit with people about this, you just have to get out and do it. You don't need a boat. There are plenty of shore fishing opportunities. You don't need all the fancy gear. You simply need to just go out and do it. Like I said, if people are asking where to go, what to do, and you tell them, most people don't do it. They don't follow up. They don't go out and actually do it. They just want to know what's going on. So when I got this call, I was at my desk, and Chad Malloy called and said, hey, would you be willing to come and talk about fishing?
I thought I was calling Doug Lear.
That's right. So I don't get that 1% interest rate that we talked about? So he called and said, hey, would you be interested in coming talking fishing? And the first thing I thought was, how in the world am I going to give any information that's new? How am I going to talk to some of the best walleye anglers around? I mean, FM Walleyes is so well known as a club, as an organization, and its members, all you guys, everybody knows who you are. You guys are walleye fishing in this area. What's some schmuck from Detroit Lakes going to come over here and talk to you guys about, was my first thought. And I've done a lot of the small talks, I've done a lot of seminars, and I've been a big proponent of the sport. Usually doesn't bother me. I can usually just walk in to a room and I can visit with people. I was intimidated by all of you, because you are known for that. So the first thing I thought was, okay, what am I gonna do? And right away, the thing that popped in my head is I do know Kyle and Scott a little bit, and Scott Brewer's kind of the whole inspiration for this topic of overthinking fish. And it is because earlier this summer, Scott is or he had contacted a friend of mine and his, and we had kind of visited, and I consider Scott to be one heck of a walleye angler. I mean, you guys all know what he does. I thought I'm more of a panfish guy. How am I gonna show these guys something? I pride myself on panfish. I fish big bluegills and crappies. I fish a lot of waters that most people don't fish. I spend a lot of time on 40, 80 acre sloughs in WPAs. How am I going to share something with you guys? And then as I sat at my desk kind of thinking about things, I was like, really, I'm a panfish guy, but am I really overthinking things? I catch walleyes too. I can do this. I sometimes stumble onto little walleye rearing ponds just on a fluke. And so it reminded me of the story where Scotty is this, in my mind, this great walleye angler, and he's in a pinch or he's on the lake and he wants to know how to catch crappies, where to catch crappies. And this buddy of ours is sending me a text saying, well, Scotty wants to know where to catch crappies. Like, are you kidding me? A guy, this FM walleye guy, these guys are, they're up here in the walleye world. They know how to fish. Well, he didn't have the confidence on this particular lake to go catch crappies. And I'm thinking, go out to the cabbage line, drive your boat until you see the cabbage with your eyes, move 3 feet off it, and hang a little white Mr. Twister tail and work that edge, and you'll find the crappies. And I feel the same way when I approach a walleye lake, and I think that's why it is a matter of overthinking. If I get onto a Lake Lida and I sit there and think, now where do I go? I'm gonna have to go out here to this structure, to this point, to this break, and I just have to fish and figure it out. The fish are there. You guys know how this walleye game operates, and fish are fish. They've been, like I said, they've been doing the same thing forever. So we're gonna talk about trying not to overthink it, and then more specifically, we're gonna talk about some tools, some tricks, some things that I do that I hope that by visiting with you, it'll give you some ideas. And again, if you guys have anything, just shout it out. So, overthinking the fish, just quit it. I'm gonna touch on some basic terminology, and again, for some of you guys, especially with the kind of club you guys have, some of these terms are gonna be very basic, but I think it's important because I get asked these a lot. Then we're going to touch on 5 major things, 1 demo with that water, and 1 kind of new thing. And again, I'm not here to sell, I'm not here to talk about how you have to use this product or that product. So I want to keep this just real, hey, this is just fishing. I don't care what suit you put on, what boots you're wearing, what augers in your hand. Let's just talk fishing. So, terminology, we'll touch upon, then location. Like I mentioned earlier, it's a big thought of people's. Do we need the weeds? Do we need basins? Do we need structure? How I pick a body of water, and this is probably one of my favorite things to do, and it's something that if you aren't doing, I hope that this will point out a few ideas. Whether to move or wait, especially important on the ice. We've heard so much over the years about being a mobile angler. Dave Gens kind of revolutionized the mobility, move, and drill a lot of holes. And I do drill a lot of holes. I usually drill 30, 40 holes before I even set up. But once I find fish, do I need to keep moving? Do I need to set up on for the day? How are we doing? Touch on gear and technique real quickly, and then just because it has to be done, some safety on the ice. I know most of us are real familiar with safety, but I at least want to touch upon it. So, structure. The terminology we use, point. If a point, it's as simple as where the land comes out into the lake, land is surrounded by water on 3 sides, you've got a point. You've got your bar, shallow water, surrounded on 3 sides by deep water. Usually it's a point that just extends. Again, pretty common sense. A break. Okay, break serves as a travel corridor in a lot of situations. So breaks, drop-offs, I find it interesting that we talk about drop-offs at the end of our dock when kids are swimming, yet when you start talking fishing and then, we're working the break line. Same basic thing. These breaks are, for me, in a lot of situations and a lot of times where these fish are moving, that's their travel corridors. You find where they're traveling, you're on the fish. Humps, again, is it a hump? Is it an underwater island? Is it a sunken island? Well, it's a hump. I mean, we use all these terms interchangeably, and I don't wanna sound like, I mean, we're getting down to the basics, but sometimes that's, you know, what you just need to be reminded of, or make sure that we're all on the same page. A saddle, I always, you know, well, I was fishing that saddle right outside the break. Well, where, you know? Saddle's gonna be an area between two sunken islands. You get, or you have your sunken island, deep water between, another sunken island. You got your fingers, they're just extensions of the bar or the humps out there. And then probably the one that I'm asked the most about is inside turns, outside turns. You know, I have guys show me all the time on a map, you know, I was fishing this inside turn. Is it an inside turn? I don't know. Is it an outside turn? It looks more like an outside turn. Inside turns. So points and bars have outside turns and inside turns. It's where it curves around the structure, whether it's coming in or coming out around a point. I'll show you that right here because I do think that this is important. So you've got an inside turn is somewhere that it comes back in towards the point. Your outside turn is on the edge of that point. And, you know, a lot of times those turns seem to congregate fish, whether it's an outside or an inside turn, but where there's a point leading to structure or a change leading to structure seems to draw those fish in. That seems to be the areas that they want to move in and out of. Okay? So, if you need to narrow down your search, if you start talking to people, these are the terms that we're using. It's the terms that you make yourself familiar with those terms and you can go and start talking fishing to people and understand it. Lake maps are definitely a huge resource, and when you're using a lake map, to understand those terms, to understand the breaks, to understand the inside and outside turns, to understand the humps, the saddles, all those are going to make you a better angler, and they're also going to eliminate a heck of a lot of the guesswork. All of a sudden, you can walk onto a lake, and instead of needing to drill 50 holes to find a break line, you can look at a lake map, and you can actually say, okay, there should be a hump over here and a hump over here. I want to get down and fish that saddle area in between. Well, looking at these lake maps, you can get really darn close. None of them are perfect, but you can get pretty darn close. So that leads me to pretty much the start of what we're going to talk about on location. And location. We all hear it. And location is super important. In early ice situations like right now, and by early ice, I'm talking the period from first freeze up until, probably 4 or 5 weeks into the season, till the new year, I consider to be early ice. Right now, it's December 3rd, I believe, and I haven't been on the ice out fishing. I've been on 8-10 bodies of water checking the ice, seeing what it is, but this is still early ice, and these fish are still going to be where they are, early ice, until they get spooked out or until something changes where their forage is moved out. So in clear, shallower lakes, I typically, at early ice, I start on the edge of the weeds. Again, you can use your lake map. You can see, sometimes you can physically see the weeds, or if you were in your boat and there were weeds there, make a mental note, because those weeds are going to still be there at first ice. I get out and I would go up and set on the edge of weeds. Okay? Being a panfish guy, being a crappie guy, I use a lot of the bowl presentation where crappies, I'm out fishing the bowl. I want to move out into the deep water. It's where I start, even though a lot of times I can find them up shallow. A lot of times the bigger crappies, especially during the day, are going to move out over a basin and suspend. So when I'm thinking walleyes, I will always start weeds, but in my mind, I replace the bowl thought. If I'm going to a lake that's a bowl, I replace it with structure. And I think, point, structure, what's my next move? So real quickly, we'll see if my things will open up. Just so we are, again, on the same page, here is Sour Lake, right off Highway 59. This lake has a public access just off 59. It's got a giant bowl, a big basin out, about 32 feet of water. And in my mind, if I'm thinking a bowl fish, I'm looking for that deep hole, that basin area, and that's where I'm gonna move out and look at the basin bite. I'm gonna be looking for suspended fish. Now, that's a fairly shallow lake. You know, you're looking at only 30-some feet of water. So, in my mind, that's where I'm gonna start, is out in a basin for crappies. I'm gonna be up in the weeds for walleyes. And then, as winter progresses, and as we move away from some of those easy fish, like I said, the bull thought gets replaced with structure and points. So, I have to wait for my links to work. The slide that is coming up, hopefully, is of Lake Melissa, and it's a lake that has so much structure that you're, I hope my, we'll see, and if it doesn't work, we just still have to move on. Okay, and this isn't real big, but you know, when you start looking at a lake with so much more structure, then you can't just say go out to the basin and fish. You need to narrow it down to those areas like the saddles, the humps, the sunken islands, the break lines, things like that are where you're gonna wanna start to look. Close all tabs. My computer wasn't compatible with the setup here. So, okay, so once you are on the lake, you get your location, you figure out where you want to be, whether it's on the weed line, it's out on the structure, or it's in a basin. You can really narrow down your options. Okay, even more important than that is picking a body of water. And before I pick a body of water, there's a ton of lakes that are old reliable. Whether you're used to fishing cormorant, you know what to do on Cormorant Lake. You're used to fishing Lake Lida or Sally, Melissa, I mean, whatever the big lakes are, you're used to fishing them. It's your old reliable, it's your old setup. Well, one of the things that I've really discovered can up my odds on a lake is picking a lake that isn't 2,000 acres, that isn't full of structure, that isn't somewhere that, you know, there's a million people coming and going, and there's a group over here, and a group over here, and a group over here, and nobody really seems to be really doing well. So what I've started to do, and this is a huge, huge advantage, I think, is I have started searching aerial photos. And one of the things that I want to show you is a tip that has really helped me is I go on aerial photos and I really focus on the color of a body of water. So if I am using a lake photo, and hopefully it works again. Okay, if I start looking at a lake, and I don't know if you can see that or not, it doesn't, it's a little bit too bright, but you can see it a little bit. What I really focus on is I take a look at an aerial photo, and this is a lake right by Hitterdal that I found had a ton of walleyes this big in. It was an old rearing pond apparently, or a new rearing pond. And what I've discovered is if you look at this right here, that little green area, if I see green, it typically is going to be too shallow of water to hold fish. Okay? If I'm seeing kind of a grayish, a lot of times those are the waters in WPAs, in waterfall production areas, or just little ponds that everybody drives by. But if they have a gray hue to them and not a green, a lot of times that's water that's, 16, 18 feet deep. And a lot of times there's a lot of weeds, especially around the edges, but you'll find pockets in there. And a lot of times you'll find fish in those bodies of water. The other thing is if you start looking at real dark areas, typically that's already an established lake. A lot of times you'll find out that it's completely private if there's no public access. But if they're real dark, typically it's an established lake. If they've got a greenish hue to them or a grayish hue, they're usually fishable and a lot of times have fish. And if they're green, you can kind of skip over them. It has helped me find new bodies of water like I can't even describe. I mean, those are the bodies of water that I've run into Ryan on, or I've seen, other people on. They're bodies of water that you spend too much time and people start coming out and wanting to know what you're doing. Okay, same thing here. It's a little bit hard to tell, but this little body of water was 62 acres, and it was a phenomenal bluegill fishery for 2 seasons till word got out. However, guys catch walleyes off the road there. It's a body of water that's, anybody can go fish. And a lot of times, these are the things that we find because looking at aerial photos. I can already tell you I'm not gonna go up and bother even wasting my time with that body of water because it's too green. It's too shallow. The satellite images show me. Same with the one in the far right-hand corner. It's just too shallow. If it's not the greenish gray hues, it's not gonna be deep enough. And a lot of people aren't gonna be out there reinventing the wheel. They're not gonna go bother to try new bodies of water. But for me, that's one of the most rewarding aspects, or some of the biggest payoffs, is going out and trying these bodies of water that other people aren't on. And sometimes you're rewarded really nicely. A lot of times the old rearing ponds, like I said, they've got the fences and the weed lines. They're full of weeds on the edges, but by looking at the aerial photos, you can see, hey, that body of water gets deep out there in the middle. You can walk out and you can drill some holes, tell in a hurry. Just a quick lake finder. If you're not using it, you should. I put it up in case somebody here hasn't heard of it. Go to the DNR lake finder, and you will be happy with what you get from the area. You can type in just about any lake. It'll have the stocking data or the netting data. It'll give you the information about it. But more importantly, it gives me the aerial view, and I can pull up Cormorant, and I can see all those little ponds around Cormorant, and I can say, okay, well, this one might hold fish. Is anybody in there? Hey, this one might be worth checking out. And it's becoming more and more commonplace to walk down into these little rearing ponds, and they're full of 10, 12, 13-inch crop or walleyes, but there's also the chance that some big fish in there. Mover weight, like I said in the beginning, you get the this. I have to be a mobile angler. I have to move. I have to move. I have to move. Okay. Well, basin roaming fish, the break line, the drop-off fish, on the edge of the basins can sometimes be weighted out. Okay. Walleyes aren't going to be out in the middle of a basin suspending. It's just, if you've got a 50-foot hole, you're not going to go set up for walleyes looking for fish 30 feet down. Instead, those are the areas, slide up that break line, find the edges, find the travel corridors where these fish are moving, and all of a sudden, you can set up there and you can punch a hole and you can actually wait for the fish to come to you. They're going to be moving in and out of these areas throughout the day. So a lot of times I'll set up on an edge of a basin bite, and that you're upping your odds to succeed by just setting up and waiting for fish to come to you. If you're 5 feet off, if you're in 23 feet and the fish are coming through at 28, you can be out of luck. But a lot of times you will find fish, you'll find stragglers that you can use lures to call them in, that type of thing. If I'm fishing weed lines or edge-related fish, points, inside turns, things like that, I consider that a time to move. That's where I think it's important. If you're not on fish in these locations, get going. A lake like Lake Melissa is so full of structures, so full of weed lines and break lines and different areas that, to me, it's too big of an area to be able to just move, or to be able to just sit and wait for fish to come to you. You need to be able to move. If you're planning on finding the weed line that these fish are moving in, they're typically not going to be cruising every weed line in the lake. They're living in those weeds. They're eating in those weeds. Move around, find the fish. You know, you're gonna find yourself much more successful moving with the fish, moving around, and finding the active fish, finding the bait fish that they're feeding on, and try to get on them. Okay? What if I find fish? It was Johnny Candle, who is an excellent, renowned fisherman. I remember him at one time saying, I listened to a seminar that he did, and he said, why move to find fish if you've already found fish? And I've been out in the boat, and hey, we found fish. We know that there's fish down there, yet, geez, we can't get them to bite. Maybe move away and come back to those fish, see if they've risen up, see if they're ready to eat. But if you're on a bigger body of water, and you know you found fish, you're graphing fish, you're seeing fish on the underwater camera or whatever you're using, I don't think you need to go out and, kill yourself trying to find another group of fish. You might have luck finding active fish somewhere else, but for the most part, if you locate fish, then it's just a matter of either being there when they decide to feed or figuring out what you can do to get them to feed. And I've got a little clip coming up at the end of exactly that. You can bang your head against the wall when you know there's walleyes down there, you know fish are there, and they just won't bite. You can't get them to go. What am I doing wrong? Well, that's where it's time to get creative, trying to come up with some new things. So, again, that's where the presentation, lure selection, mix it up. Figure out, do these fish not want this? What are they feeding on? What are they doing out here that they don't want my lure? Okay, this is just a quick picture of exactly that. And this was a move guy versus the weight crowd. So we had a great big group of guys out, and we were waiting for fish. We knew these fish were using this little piece of structure right here, and they were moving in and out. So when they'd come in, it was fast and furious. Everybody's bobber shooting down, everybody's jig is getting hit. And this guy, he decided he's going to follow the fish. And we had, 400 holes out there. We had a heck of a mess of holes. And he followed the fish constantly. That entire group making noise, being loud, and just, congregating, weren't following the fish. The group did so much better than he did that we were all talking, and that's why we took the picture. Because he was trying to follow the fish, and he's always a step behind. Zig when you should have zagged type thing. And these fish were relating to this certain piece of structure. I don't know where they were going or why they were going, but I think it was probably due to them getting so beat up on and getting pushed out of there from all the noise. They'd be gone for 5 minutes, 8 minutes, and then they'd come back and everybody'd be giggling. It was fast and furious. And the guy chasing them didn't do as well because he wasn't in the right place at the right time. Classic example of you don't always need to be running around, be mobile. Sometimes if you know you're on a good piece of structure, if you know you've got fish moving in and out, you don't need to be running around. Just sit down and enjoy it because they'll be back. Okay? Gear and techniques for this early ice season. Again, we've got your active stick, dead stick, plastics versus live. Line selection is something I'm asked a lot about, and if any of you have opinions on it, I'd love to hear it. And then crankbaits on ice. I know there's a lot of Lake Winnipeg guys and gals in here that Lake Winnipeg is an amazing fishery, and using big baits, using the live targets, things like that. But the crankbaits on ice is just kind of a new concept to some. So we've got actively jigging versus dead stick. Sometimes a dead stick will be your go-to. And by a dead stick, I'm talking a bobber or just a rod sitting on a bucket or in a rod holder. Okay? This is a video, and I don't know how well you're going to be able to see it with the light. It was on Little Detroit last fall, or actually it was last winter. And when fish are super negative, we can actually scare them with our lures. I've got a walleye that comes in here, and I happen to be watching on the camera, and I grab the jig to quick jig, and as soon as I move that bait, that fish took off. So he came into my lure, I wiggled it, and boom, gone. That bait, that movement instantly scared that walleye. And it does look better on a video than it did up there. But, so when they're really tough, if you can find a large area, a large school of fish, you know, especially, like I said, if you're on a piece of structure or you know, hey, the fish were here, just sometimes it's when you sit down, you wait, you get patient, you wait for the fish, they'll be back, have your rod sitting in a rod holder, and a lot of times, you know, if you want to jig it, and if those fish don't want that, you're doing more damage and hurting yourself more than you're helping yourself. So if you're like me and have a tough time not moving things, set your rod down. Wait for it to start loading up, or put on a bobber and watch that bobber go down, because those fish don't want it moving. Dead sticks will only work when you have fish moving, you know, around the area. Okay, if there's no fish below you, if you're gonna go out into Lake Sally and you're gonna go straight out from the axis, you're gonna find 30 feet of water and you're gonna just sit there. You might get lucky, but without doing a little bit of research, you're kind of wasting time. You know, a dead stick isn't gonna start bringing fish in from other areas, or if you got a fish 8 feet away, they're probably not gonna come rushing into your dead stick. Okay, so why 2 rods are optimal when you're out there if you're searching. You know, I like to rip jig or jig something. Rattle spoons are phenomenal. You know, these blade spoons, the anything with a rattle, something to get these fish to have something to key in on to move up. And they might not want the jigged fish, but if you're far enough away, you know, if you've got 2 holes, a lot of times a jigged motion will bring them in, and then the dead stick is where you're going to actually have your success. You know, that minnow's fighting its way around and they hit it. So the jigging aspect, a lot of guys ask, you know, do you use a swivel or do you tie directly? I will almost always use a swivel if I'm using a rattle spoon, if I'm using blade spoons, speed spoons, anything like that, I'm using a swivel. If I'm using more of a jig head, a lot of times I'll just tie directly. The spoons and blades, obviously, it works better with the swivel. I feel you eliminate a lot of the line twist. Same with the live targets and the crankbaits on ice. Use a swivel, it'll save you a lot of headaches. Actively jigging can really call them in. When you're jigging though, one of the biggest things, and again, is your cadence or your rhythm of how you're jigging. You know, sometimes it seems like the fish want a certain motion, too rapid of a motion or too high of a jig actually will scare the fish. You know, play around, find a motion. If you're jigging that jig and all of a sudden you get, you know, boom, you get hit, go back to that same motion. The other thing is if I'm jigging, or if you're out there and you're jigging and boom, you miss a fish, what do I see guys do? And I'm guilty of it myself, is you stop and you start wiggle, 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 you know, trying to entice the bite. Well, that fish came in and hit for a reason. That fish came in on this jigging motion. Go back to the jigging motion. Go back to the same motion that fish came in and hit, because that fish wanted to eat. You were doing something right. You were mimicking it. And again, I'll see if this can show up, but this is a great example of how a fish can miss a moving target. Maybe. So here's actual walleyes coming in, guys jigging, getting the fish to come up, and he starts to jig and he pulls it away. Fish misses. I mean, they'll actually come in, you know, that fish did its best to hit it, but they will, you know, they'll miss that bait if you're jigging. It's when you go right back to using the same cadence, the same presentation, and try to get them to come back in. Rod selection, I'm just kind of rolling through everything quickly now, but you know, again, I use a lot of the clam line rods. For panfish, I love the meat stick as far as a commercially made rod. There are so many good rod companies out there right now. It's unbelievable, okay? There's so many custom rods. I don't care if it's DH rods, Thorn Brothers, tuned up custom rods. they're all making amazingly quality rods. As far as, you know, the mass-produced manufactured rods, most of them are really good. It's a matter of what fits you the best. Best thing I can recommend is go out and get a lot of rods in your hand. Grab a rod, see how it feels, see how you like the action, see how you like the bend. Find a rod that just fits you. Length is gonna be dependent on sometimes you, sometimes how you fish. If I'm in a one-man fish trap and I'm fishing, sight fishing, I need a super short rod. I want a 16-inch rod just so I can be hovered right over my hole. If I'm fishing in my two-man fish trap, I'm sitting there and I've discovered that the way my seats are, I can't do anything over a 26-inch rod. Because how I end up fishing is I smack the front of my, if I'm using a 28-inch rod, I smack the front of my shelter. If I'm gonna be up in a snow bear, which is fantastic, you can get away with a longer rod. You know, it's just a matter of where you're fishing, what's gonna do, what it's gonna work for you. Same with, personally, I'm not a real big fan of a real whippy or a light rod, like a meat stick. A meat stick, for, like I said, for panfish, phenomenal. If I'm jigging walleyes or using a heavier lure, I don't like that whippiness. I want a stiffer tip. I want a medium light for my buckshot spoons, my speed spoons, things like that. But for heavier crankbaits, I'm up to a medium rod. I know for the big walleyes up in Lake Winnipeg, they'll sometimes even go bigger, go with medium heavy. With my dead stick, there I'm not as concerned. I can have a little bit stiffer backbone. You know, the other thing is a lot of guys, it's bobber or bucket, or bobber or rod holder. Again, if that bobber, if those fish don't want that bait moved, sometimes you're better off just setting it down and leaving it and wait for the fish to come up and honestly catch itself. If they don't want it moved, you're hurting yourself. One thing I always say consider is the larger eyelets. If you're gonna fish outside, lay them on the ice. You know, larger eyelets are gonna benefit you more than the smaller eyelets just because they get so froze up, or your line gets froze up. When we talk plastics versus live bait, is there anybody in here that fishes plastics a ton? Most guys fish live bait? Okay. I fish plastics probably 95% of the time, whether it's walleyes or panfish. I like plastics. There's a huge selection of them. You've got your impulse eye, you know, the impulse lures. I like the walleye eyes or the big eyes. I think they've got some really neat features to them. If I'm using a plastic, I want a larger profile plastic. They've got the lifelike motion. They won't freeze up if you're hole hopping or you're moving from place to place. I don't use them on treble hooks. If I'm using a jigging spoon of some sort, I'm not going to usually use plastics. I'll use a minnow head. Live bait, got your live, your frozen, your salted minnows, waxworm, shrimps, and frogs. And frogs are what we're going to talk about at the very end. Is there anybody in here who's used frogs in the winter? Okay. It's becoming more and more talked about, and I think it's probably something you're going to hear more and more about in the upcoming seasons. Most guys right now are using minnows, either part of a minnow or minnow head. You got your different plastics again. You know, you've got the larger profile of the Mackie plastics. I like the original Mackie. You got your impulse eye, jumbo nuggies. This is called the Jamie, and again, I like the larger profile. It's the Jamie XL. It's a little bit bigger than some. Your live bait, you're down to your shiners, your fatheads, your sucker minnows, and frogs. So, brings me back to the lipless crankbaits on ice. Most of the time, people are using their live targets for some reason, and I've not been to Lake Winnipeg, so from what I hear, is medium the size that you use up on Lake Winnipeg? I mean, everybody says, you know, use the mediums. The mediums are the way to go. You have the Psycho Shad, which I've had a lot of luck on, the Chubby Darters, the Jigging Wraps, which now become so much more popular in open water than the ice world, it seems. But don't overlook them come ice season. They were working for you all open water. They're a phenomenal lure during the ice season as well. crankbaits on ice. This is the only product plug I'm gonna do, and this is what my water is for, but I think if anybody wants to see it, they can come up. So, this year, I don't know how many of you are familiar with Today's Tackle. Bruce Mosier he came up with the original ice buster bobber, the big yellow bobber. He's an outdoor innovator that he's done amazing things. What he came up with and has now sold to Clam is the crank weight, and I guarantee you that knowing some of the people in this room, you've got piles of crankbaits. I mean, you've got crankbaits organized by size, shape, color, what they do, what time of year you use them, what depth they run at. And what this little thing does is it turns your crankbaits into lures you can use for ice fishing. And if you haven't seen it, check it out. I've got just a smattering of different crankbaits here, and I'll show you a couple on rods too, but they come in 3 sizes. You've got, I believe, an 1/8 ounce, 1/4 ounce, and a 3/8 ounce. And all that you do is clip them onto an existing lipped crankbait. The weight hangs below the hook so it doesn't interfere with it, and they have been more fun to play with than, this is just a quick clip where I think it's 40 seconds where he shows you how they work. And we'll keep it just real short, but I want you to just see for a second. So he's taken, I mean, his summer crankbaits, and everyone, what I've discovered, I played with a lot of them. I keep that tub in the bathtub, and I've been playing with a ton. And it seems like every crankbait is just a little bit different, but some of them have amazing actions to them. I know that there's been other things like that, but this was just a way for me to, I've got thousands of dollars in crankbaits, and now I feel like I've got different options come ice season for walleyes because this is allowing me to use my existing bait. Some of them will have just a crazy rocking motion. Some of them will, come to the point where you're in 15 feet of water and you do a big jig. They'll actually, I can't pick them up on the cone. They've moved, 6-8 feet in one direction just by one jig. The Selma Hornet was one that I was playing with, and it just had a crazy rocking motion. Again, just a different idea. I know how popular live target baits are up in Winnipeg, but I see so much potential with this particular thing that I had to at least show it in case you hadn't seen it. They say you want to put it on a crankbait, and you want it to drop about a foot a second, 1.5 foot a second. It slows it down. It's done a pretty cool job of revolutionizing the use of your crankbaits. So mono versus braid, we'll touch real short on. I'm a big fan of mono. I like a little bit extra stretch to my line. Kid friendly, it's easy to tie. If you're going to be out with a family, mono's probably the way to go in most situations. I actually like having a little bit more stretch to my line. I think sometimes when there's no stretch, it can benefit you because you can feel it instantly, but I think sometimes you almost feel it too quick. Or I've also had big fish lost because I set the hook just too hard, and now, boom. So depending on your application, mono versus braid, I'm not a huge believer in you need to use this, you need to use fluorocarbon, you need to use a certain type of braid or a certain type of mono. Go with what you can get at a decent price. Again, today's internet age, if somebody's making a bad product, you're gonna hear about it. They're not gonna be around. Most of these products are solid. Go with what works for you. See what you want. You can get away with the smaller diameter on a finicky bite sometimes of the braid is a huge advantage. Other times, it really doesn't seem to matter. You know, these big walleyes, they're eating. They're not just coming in to check things out. If they're coming in, the chances are they're gonna eat. Lastly, before we get to the very last thing is just ice safety. I don't know, and again, I know most of us are probably avid ice anglers. This is the time of year that it spooks me because people do foolish things. Like Scott and Kyle saw the other night. I mean, this kid was out where people had been in boats the day before. Use your ice spud. Make sure that you are checking it, you're walking, you're giving it a good punch. You know, go with a buddy. Ice cleats are a must. I've used every imaginable pair of ice cleats. I bought these Catula micro spikes. If you haven't seen them, hands down the best spikes that I've ever used. You can run on the ice with them. I mean, they grip. You don't want to wear them on your hardwood floors, but they definitely have bite. They're going to be amazing. Out of all of them that I've used, this one's kept up the best. I don't always take the best care of my stuff, so these get thrown in the truck and they're there from December till April. Then the other big one is a nebulous device. The nebulous device hooks onto your ATV, hooks onto your snowmobile, and if you were to go through, you pull the cord, and it will act pretty much as a bobber. You have a life raft for yourself to get on. It also tethers your vehicle 8 feet down. The cost of recovering vehicles from 30 feet of water is significantly more than recovering it from 8 feet of water. It can be a life-saving tool. This time of year, I actually keep it in my truck, and when I am out in my portable, I throw it in my portable, because it's a rescue device. It's a $350 product that I hope I never have to use. And here, I don't even know, 4 years ago, a good friend of mine and a lot of ice fishermen, Jim Hudson, went through the ice, and he had a nebula sitting in his front seat of his pickup that day. It's peace of mind, if nothing else. I get asked a lot about them, so I brought one just to show you what it is, how big it is. You know, don't pull the yellow cord, but this is what it is. If anybody's curious, check it out. I don't sell them. I have no affiliation with selling them. They're just a pretty cool product for ice safety. So I don't go on the ice anymore without it. I have 2 small kids, and my wife actually bought it for me and said, "Here you go. This is your gift from us this year." So ice picks, of course. Hopefully everybody's wearing ice picks. Life jacket. If you've ever heard Dave Gens talk about early ice stuff, he'll oftentimes say he's never heard of a body being frozen in the ice with a life jacket on, and it's so true. I mean, you've got your ice suits. You've spent all this money on what you're wearing, what you're doing, and then most people don't even think about throwing on their life jacket that they a lot of times wouldn't leave dry land without when they're heading out in their boat. Put it on. I wear it all the time. I have an inflatable one, and I know that if the worst case happens, I'm okay. The other thing is ropes. Make sure you have ropes. Whether you have it attached to a seat cushion, something, have ropes. I have tons of rope, and not only for yourself, but if you ever come across somebody else struggling, at least you can help them there. So, last thing before we wrap up is thinking outside the box. And I have to apologize for this because I had some great video of this on a little micro SD card about this big. And my wife and I moved, and the storage unit came on Thursday. And I cannot find the little micro SD card that is that big, or a spare set of car keys, but it's a whole other subject. So so thinking outside the box, there's some really cool things. I saw this picture, and this is where I mentioned the frog bite. So a buddy sent it to me last year, and I was fishing Little Detroit. I'll tell you exactly. I mean, I was out there. I had my daughter and 2 of her girlfriends out, and I set up in the permanent house, put on the camera, and it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and we're fishing for sunfish, and they're catching sunnies. And I drop that camera down, and it is a parade of walleyes for hours. I mean, from 3 o'clock till dark. I had walleyes going past nonstop. And there were some big fish in there. Could not get them to bite. I was talking to other people, could not get them to bite. People were saying, haven't caught a walleye. We've got our shiners down all night long. We're using this. Nobody was getting fish to bite. Then I get a Facebook picture, and this lady has a walleye. And I said, what'd you catch? I don't care where you caught. I want to know what it was eating. What'd you catch it on? Well, it turns out she snagged it. And she's like, well, we caught it right here. And okay, go with whatever you know there. But she brought it home, cut it open. There were frogs in its stomach. And I instantly thought, okay, well, we need to change this. So some of my stuff, I contacted a lure maker out in Vermont that makes some plastics. I said, how can I mimic a frog? What can I do? And there's some really cool things that are in the works. But what I ended up doing, and this is, you will not see a walleye eat here, which is unfortunate. But what I ended up doing is took a bass, just a rubber bass frog from the summer. I took the hook out. I put a weighted hook in. And because I couldn't find the actual one I was using, I did the same thing here. Just put a 39-cent weighted hook in, and it now sinks. So I would puff that thing off the bottom, and I would get more reactions, and it's on the micro SD card that I sent to the bait place that is somewhere, but I would just sit there and puff the bottom, and I would have fish come in and hit the mud. I never caught a fish on my plastic frog get-up. However, I learned a ton, because they would come in and they would hit the mud with crazy force. And I mean, everything would go dirty for a while, and I was done. But I was playing with it a lot. So this was what I did, is I did a little bit of research and mimicking nature. And if you want to see it, and we're getting lengthy here, but if you want to see it, what I did was played with this bucket, and I watched clips. Now watch these frogs. These are frogs in the winter that aren't in the mud. Now we all hear or think of frogs suspend or are down in the mud, they burrow themselves in. These are frogs. And they're actually kind of suspended, animated. I don't know what they're doing. They're not dead. They're hanging out there. There's a third one right there that's, it's hard to see right there, but it's sitting this way, and the other are up and down. Well, what I did was played around with lures. I've got a rod, I can hook it up to it, and I can make this thing suspend just like that, where I can let it sit there, whether it's on a dead stick, or if I want to go down and hit the bottom. This is probably going to be something you're going to see more and more guys talking about. This was, they said, come up with one thing that is different than what people are doing now. Come up with one tip you can share with these guys. And truly, I feel as though, out of all the stuff I've talked about, this is one of the cooler things to just, could be up and coming, could be worth somebody trying, because guys are doing it, and these walleyes are clearly feeding on frogs in the winter. Not everywhere, this is a muddy bay, but worth at least looking at, thinking about. It's a little bit, think outside the box. Well, there was my live demo. Last thing I have is questions. Anybody got, yes sir?
I fished Lida for many years, but there's a sunfish hole and I consistently would get sunfish, but the last couple of years has been just difficult. Has the zebra mussels affected, you think, where fish have consistently been in the past or not?
Absolutely. And Lida's probably one of my go-to lakes. I know Lida quite well, especially some of the sunfish holes. And I really think that the zebra mussels have made a huge impact, because the opener we were out there, we were slip bobbering in 22 feet of water, and you'd set the hook, and on the first crank you'd see your fish. That water's clearing up a lot, and it's clearing up because some of those weed beds are gone. You've got a lot of those areas, and that's why I said fish have been doing the same thing for 40 years or 100 years. But some of the natural or unnatural things that are coming in, I think are certainly affecting the fish. I don't think it's hurting a lot of the fish in some situations. I think they're moving. Now it's a matter of, I had a little weed bed on Lida as well. I could go right to in the summer and one after another, you could get the sunfish to go. This year there were still weeds there, the weed stands weren't as thick, but the sunfish weren't there. And it has to be something, whether it's a crayfish, maybe it's a muskie issue. We can always blame the muskies for everything that goes wrong in the lakes. But the thing is, yeah, I do think that the zebra mussels are having, they're changing the patterns of some of these fish. Yep.
I can back you up on the frog thing. We cut open several fish last winter on Lida, as a matter of fact.
Yep.
And found frogs. And then we also had a trip we were in Renville, South Dakota on Lake Wabe. And the bait shop threw out buckets of frogs out their back door in the fall.
Mhm.
All winter, fishermen were digging out the back door in the snow banks for those frogs.
I believe it, and you know, like I said, this, you know, here I wanted to come up with one thing to share just to think outside the box, because I do a lot of this, things that people don't do, whether it's fishing small bodies of water or trying different things. I'm not always successful. I strike out way more than I succeed, but I have been very fortunate because every now and again, might be 1 out of 10 tries, all of a sudden you stumble onto something that really works, and I can giggle about it, and I've got a great chance of catching fish, I've got a great picture fish, or have an opportunity to film a television show, things like that with people, just because of the extra effort that put in. So this was an FIM Walleye exclusive tonight that, I mean, I shared this because this isn't common knowledge, this isn't something that everybody's talking about, and I came here to talk about it briefly because there's something to it. And if you spend some time researching it, especially those suspended frogs really got me curious. I always jigged my frogs last winter. Well, is there something to just, what if I just hang that frog there? You know, is it a reaction bite? Do they see those frogs and just come in and smoke it without, you know, paying any attention? If they're accustomed to coming in and hitting something or eating something a certain way, they're gonna come in and hit it, you know? So it's a matter of figuring out what. Yes, sir?
Did you get walleyes on these frogs last winter?
I never caught one, but I had several misses, and it was more, I started playing around with it right at the end of the season.
Are you finding these in the mud basins or are you up in the mud shallow?
No, mud basins out in, you know, 18 feet of, yeah, well, 18, 20 feet of water. Once the weeds died off, it was that mucky bottom, you kind of see it. The frogs, I mean, maybe they're eating them up shallower, and so maybe it was unnatural that we were out in deeper water. You know, there was a lot of things that we're just starting to play with, but I guarantee you I've got some pretty cool stuff coming for this winter, early ice. I'll be picking it up down at the ice show this weekend because there are some things that, there's a lot of experimenting left to be done. And you know, you guys as truly pretty much revolutionized walleye fishing around here. You're the group that brought a lot of these techniques, these new things to this area. People hadn't heard of whether it was a certain kind of spoon or a certain kind of rapala until FM Walleye guys started telling them about it. So this is gonna be something, most likely. Or maybe it'll strike out and you'll try it for a couple of years and nope, this one didn't work. But there's something to it. And if you haven't thought about it, this is where it's at. So, I thank you guys for letting me come and talk, and be safe this ice season, and have a good night.
As always, Tony, every one of our speakers gets an FM Walleye hat.
Perfect.
Thank you very much.
Thank
You
you.
should get two because you did so well, but we only brought one.
Perfect, thank you.
You did a great job.